Today's episode is brought to you by Modern Grower. Modern Grower is your source for time and labor-saving farm tools, such as the Paper Pot Transplanter, Quick Click Seeder, and the Jang Direct Seeder. Turn laborsome tasks into free time with tools by Modern Grower.
Yeah, that point about more carbon being in the soil than in the vegetation and atmosphere combined, it's interesting. And I want to circle back to that but first I want to talk about one of those changes in your beliefs of you grew up thinking this, a lot of people grew up thinking this, and it changed along the way, and that's humus. And I don't want to spoil the end of the story, but if we go back to what you were taught before you know what you know now, why was the theory of humus put out there, and why did it make sense at the time originally?
Yeah, and a lot of that history will probably still need to be written. But the abridged version that I am aware of is that starting with the late 1700s, researchers were interested in finding out the world around us. And one big part of the world around us is soil. And figuring out what organic matter in soil looks like, they had to get it out because it was impossible at the time to study the organic matter in soil without getting it away from the minerals and the rocks. And the way to do that the first scientists that tried that in earnest figured out you have to do it with a certain extraction. They used alkaline solution to do that, and it worked beautifully. You get a brown soup that comes out of the soil, and then they were able to study it in greater detail, looked at what atoms are in there, that there's nitrogen in there, that there's carbon in there, that there's oxygen in there, all these things that they needed to figure out in the 1700s and 1800s. And then researchers found out that when they used different alkali they precipitated or made less soluble or more soluble these solutions, then they could extract different types of organic matter that clearly had different properties. And over the 1800s and early 1900s, that generated scholarship that tried to explain the behavior of soil organic matter with its extractability and led to the classification of these different fractions that one can obtain with words such as humic substances, humins, fulvic and humic acids. And these kind of useful fractionation and characterization techniques generated in the mid-1900s scholarship that said there is a process called humification that generates these humic substances. And these humic substances are large, and therefore, because they are large, they cannot be eaten by microorganisms, and therefore we call them recalcitrant. That means that they will stay in the soil because they have this material property. And this is what humus is composed of. And that is what I learned in university 20, 30 years ago. And it turns out once we had the ability to look closer, to actually see what the chemistry of organic matter looks like, what it looks like in situ in soil without extracting it, we realized that we were looking at a mixture of materials that are still in a representation of what's in the soil after extraction, but it is not a material that is anywhere, as this mixture is not found in soil per se. This is similar. I use the analogy with a fruit smoothie very often. Now, if you're blending together a cherry and an orange and a strawberry and a raspberry, and you have never drunk or eaten before these fruit, and somebody serves it to you, then you might be inclined to say that this is a new fruit. But in fact, it's a mixture of four fruit. And that's fine if you're just interested in a taste. But if you're interested in reproducing it or understanding what the individual components in that fruit smoothie are doing in your gut, you need to know that this was a raspberry and a strawberry and a banana or whatever you put in there. So it's the same question here. We need, when we want to know what is a microorganism actually exposed to, when when it is in the soil? Or what is that organic compound in the soil interacting with minerals or in the water when water flows through soil? Then we need to know these individual compounds. We cannot assume that this mixture, this fruit smoothie mixture, is the compound in there. It is not. It is still a cherry and a banana, an orange and a strawberry. And we need to know that there is a strawberry in there, and it's not a new fruit that is a mixture of the four. And starting about 20 years ago, scientists have started significantly to question the existence of this process, humification, in the context of making these large recalcitrant humic substances. At the same time, we have, as a scientific community, refined our understanding that, of course, soil organic matter is largely a product of microorganisms. It's the residue, broadly speaking, of microorganisms. But it's not these large molecules that fit neatly into this understanding of humification and humic substance production that we grew up with decades ago.
So summarizing all of that, humus, as we previously understood it, or maybe at all, you let me know, just that does not exist, correct?
This is what I would say. Yes, it doesn't exist. Humus and humic substances do not exist as we had defined them decades ago. The word humus is still, one could argue, very useful in classification. There are parts of different soils that are classified as a humus layer, and that means just an organic layer on top of the soil. So that word is still potentially useful in some nomenclature, but in the context of making large recalcitrant humic substances that can be separated and understood in terms of humic acids and fulvic acids in humans, that is not an appropriate approach in my view at the present point. But it's not an uncontested one, and it is, as with any major changes in scholarship, it's a slow change, and probably for good reason. You don't want to throw out all your knowledge, and you never should, in one swoop. But it seems that is a knowledge shift, and that has been coming on for several decades now, at least about 2 to 3 decades, that has taken hold in the last 5 to 10 years.
Today's episode is brought to you by Modern Grower. Let's face it, seeding in the nursery is tedious and time-consuming. Turn the drudgery into efficiency with the time and labor-saving Quick Click Seeder by Modern Grower. The Quick Click can seed a full nursery tray in seconds. It's fully compatible with all trays on the market, such as paper pot, airstrip, cell trays, PropTech, and more. The Quick Click can also be used for microgreens. Cut your time spent seeding by 75% with a Quick Click Seeder available at shop.moderngrower.co.